Well, as you could tell from the title of this video, we've got some big rumor news to discuss regarding Jon Favreau and a potentially new position that he might hold at the Walt Disney Company, namely one that is a creative advisory position to folks like Alan Bergman and Bob Chapek over all Disney Studios. You probably saw this story break Friday afternoon from our friend Doomcock over at Overlord DVD. Well, about a week ago now, WDW Pro at thatparkplace.com shared that story with me and Doomcock. And out of respect, I wanted to make sure that Doomcock got the first leg on the story to put it out Friday, because I wanted to take more of the typical approach that we do here on this channel at Valiant Renegade and do a little bit more of an in-depth business discussion as far as the veracity of this kind of story, which I happen to think holds a lot of merit. And in order to really get to that point, it's really important that you watch this opening segment. Don't skip to the part with Kamran. I know some of y'all like to do that, and that's fine. But in terms of context, well, context is key. And context in the case of the story happens to start with this gentleman right here. This is John Lasseter. Now, to understand what's going on right now with Jon Favreau at Disney, we need to first understand the history of this gentleman here, John Lasseter, who came to Disney at a very young age right out of college. We're going to discuss some of that history. So let's start talking about that right now. In 1975, John Lasseter enrolled at the CalArts character animation program. He spent time in class with such future legends like Tim Burton. And like many students of that time, he took an internship at Disney, where he was a skipper on a Jungle Cruise boat in the Magic Kingdom, where he learned such things like comedic timing, telling stories, keeping audiences entertained. Lasseter graduated in 1979, immediately taking a job as an animator at the Walt Disney Company. And it wasn't too many years later when Lasseter began to lament some of the repetitiveness at the Walt Disney Company, thinking that the stories had become stale, that they needed something new and fresh. And this is where Lasseter's career really began to take off. But a few years later, he would find himself butting heads with studio executives when Lasseter said that the computer animation genre, as they were beginning to get into with movies like Tron, the original Tron, would be the future. Now, there was a lot of folks at Disney that were none too happy with that, and his consistent pressure of saying that this is the way we should go eventually wound up getting him forced out of Disney. But his career wasn't over yet. His next stop was something very special that really launched him into the heights, and that was Pixar. But when he started there, it wasn't really called Pixar. It was called the Lucasfilm Computer Animation Group. Now, over the years, as George Lucas went through a very embittered divorce, some of the assets of Lucasfilm had to be sold off. This is where Steve Jobs came into play, and the company had by that point been renamed to Pixar. And of course, it became the Pixar that we know and love today, which would later be purchased by Walt Disney once again. So after many years, Lasseter found himself back at his original home of the Walt Disney Company. John Lasseter was responsible for such massive classics as A Bug's Life, Toy Story, and Cars. His tenure of overseeing these tremendously successful animated projects not only got him back in the fold with Disney when they purchased Pixar in 2006, but it also put Lasseter in a very unique position. You see, John Lasseter was named as an executive creative advisor for all of Disney Studios, which at that point included now Pixar and the Walt Disney Animation Studios. John Lasseter had creative authority over everything that Disney was doing at that point. Lasseter's tenure at Disney as a creative advisor that reported directly to the CEO and the chairman of all of Walt Disney Studios lasted all the way up until 2017, when allegations of a certain type of misconduct that Hollywood no longer seems to tolerate surfaced. By June of 2018, Lasseter was retired from Disney, leaving a vacuum there, a vacuum of a position that had been held for more than 12 years, whereby studio heads, or at least the chairman of all of Walt Disney Studios, today held by Mr. Alan Bergman, would have an independent creative advisor to work with him directly, sit in on the consultation meetings to tell him what he thinks the Disney studio heads are telling him. Will they work or will they not? Well, now apparently the rumor is that position may be getting filled by none other than Jon Favreau. Let's talk about it. Here's Kamran Pasha. Welcome back, folks. Another great day here on Valiant Renegade. Good to see everybody out there. And of course, I've got my buddy here, Kamran Pasha, once again. And we're going to be talking about some of this news that has dropped recently about Jon Favreau potentially with a new position at the Walt Disney Company. Of course, before we get into it, good to see everybody again. If you are like one of the 60 or 70% of the folks watching this video right now that are not yet subscribed, maybe this is the first time you're seeing something on the channel, please make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button, that like button, that notification bell. Share this sucker out on the social medias, and do, of course, leave a comment before you head out. And as another note, thank you everybody out there who has been watching, that has been listening and subscribing to Kamran Pasha's Patreon page. Kamran, your Patreon is doing extremely well, and we want to keep encouraging folks to sign up. Kamran, how you doing today?
I'm well. And again, our conversation about the topic we're going to talk about today began with some DMs back and forth on Patreon. So that's become a really good central place for us to start incubating the ideas that turn into some of these videos.
Indeed. And you've had a lot of amazing stories that you've been putting out, a lot of great discussions, especially this past week on your Patreon page. So again, I can't encourage folks enough. I mean, if y'all are really liking this content, then get on over to Patreon. Of course, the link will be in the description of this video below. So make sure you check that out after you leave a comment and do that. I'll do all that other stuff that we talked about. So Kamran, here we are. In the intro, we talked about this position at Disney has a historical place. And the historical place before now, allegedly being in the hands of Jon Favreau, was once in the hands of a man named John Lasseter, who was the genius behind some of the biggest Pixar movies out there. John Lasseter is credited with creating films that have generated, unadjusted for inflation, I might add, almost $20 billion at the box office, including mega hits like Toy Story, Cars, Bugs Life, all these big Pixar legacies that he's left. This was a man that had the ear of the chairman of Walt Disney Studios, had the ear of the chairman of Walt Disney and the CEO of Walt Disney while he was there, Robert Iger. There's been a vacuum now for the past almost 4 years that position has been vacant after John Lasseter was heralded out the door, let's just say. And not to get into those allegations too deeply, I don't want to do that here, but just to say that there has been a vacuum. We have talked so many times now at this point on this channel about the future of Disney and Lucasfilm and Marvel Studios. Jon Favreau, of course, has always been a topic of discussion. Kathleen Kennedy, Kevin Feige. And this news comes out. This news came to us from WDW Pro at thatparkplace.com. And Pro contacted me about a week ago now, as of the time that everybody's seeing this video. And around the same time he contacted DC, and I wanted to make sure that Doomcock had his space to put the video out. That was his exclusive, just out of pure respect to him. Great guy, great friend over there on Overlord DVD's channel. But we want to talk about this today, having a little bit more of an in-depth conversation from the business side. What's going on here? Because if this is true, that Favreau is now basically stepping into the role that John Lasseter once held, that has been a vacuum now for 4 years. This, to me, seems like this is some big stuff. And to me, it seems extremely plausible because this makes a lot of sense, especially with this new regime with Bob Chapek and Susan Arnold. So, Kamran, where are you on all this?
Well, I mean, I think that this was the inevitable point we were going to get to. I think Mr. Favreau has been asserting himself step by step. I first was introduced on YouTube a year and a half ago when I happened to be on Jeremy's channel, Geeks and Gamers. I think he very graciously brought me on. At the time, I wasn't known as any kind of figure on the YouTube community at the time, but he brought me on as this guy's a screenwriter. And I happened to mention at the time that a friend of mine is a very close friend of Jon Favreau's, is in his inner circle and has been part of his team for quite some time, several years, a lot of the big movies. And we were having lunch just before all the pandemic stuff happened, and he was telling me that, John hates what they're doing with Star Wars, and he claimed to me that John had inserted himself into the Star Wars situation, that he had reached out, I guess, to Bob Iger and others and said, look, I don't think you guys are on the right track with this. I love this franchise. Let me help you. And they were very excited to have him. Yeah, he's already proven himself many times to Disney. And so from that process, we saw however he came into it, whether he was invited or he requested to be joined, he joined into the Star Wars world. And we saw a market improvement in the journey for a long portion with Mandalorian. And then there was some chaos when Ms. Carano was let go from Mandalorian, or at least wasn't renewed. And there's been a bit of chaos since then. But I think it's become clear over the past couple of years that Jon Favreau is going to be the future of Star Wars. And what's interesting now is it appears to be becoming the future of Disney itself, which is where the next step, and perhaps it was inevitable with he started off in Marvel and he launched Iron Man. This guy's a creative genius, and it would make sense for the new leadership at Disney, and there is a new leadership at Disney, to turn to him and say, what else you got for the rest of this?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Favreau, and for those of you watching out there that maybe have forgotten or maybe didn't realize, is that apart from Favreau creating the architecture for the entire MCU, starting with Iron Man, when Disney, first caught wind of what was going on at Marvel, and then shortly after that brought Marvel under the Disney banner, Jon Favreau was responsible for creating that massive architecture they had, building the entire franchise, movie by movie, film by film, character by character, to build up to what we got with the Avengers. But it didn't stop there, because once Disney took that over, Cameron, and you'll remember this, Favreau was responsible for things like The Jungle Book and The Lion King, which, I was looking at an article today on Deadline. I really haven't done a box office video in a while because there hasn't been too much new box office going on. That's going to change in the next few weeks. But they're talking about Spider-Man No Way Home, and how Spider-Man No Way Home has just eclipsed things like The Jungle Book, or The Lion King, which was a Favreau project that made almost $1.7 billion at the box office, unadjusted for inflation. That was back about 5-6 years ago now. Favreau has made Disney a ton of money. I mean, and that doesn't even include what he did with Baby Yoda, Grogu, in Mandalorian recently, where, yeah, it's a Disney Plus show, but Favreau handed them a character that's been a $1 billion merchandise seller since then. So this, to me, I love this, because they know this is a guy that has the Midas touch, literally just turning things to gold for Disney. And that, at the end of the day, I think from a business and financial perspective, this is what Disney really needs. This is what they want. They need somebody that knows how to talk to audiences. What do you think about all that?
This is absolutely what they need, and they understand what they have in him, as he's just a creative visionary across the board. But it actually answers, I think, a debate that the fandom has been having for a couple of years now, which is, would Jon Favreau become the official head of Lucasfilm? And I've always been of the point of view that I don't think that's something he wants, because he's a filmmaker and a storyteller and an artist first and foremost. While he's successful in business, I don't think he's interested in day-to-day business, because heading a studio is a lot of accounting, a lot of paperwork, a lot of deal stuff that I think he's happy to delegate to other people in every aspect of his life. And so taking on the responsibility of a studio in that role never felt right to me. But now in this position, he's essentially quantum leaped over that position, because now he's got the direct ear of Alan Bergman, who is the chairman of Disney Studios, on not just what Lucasfilm is doing, but on what Marvel is doing, what Pixar is doing. He's been promoted up. And I think it's interesting to note that this position essentially puts him in the position above Kathleen Kennedy. Whatever her day-to-day life is at Lucasfilm, he's now consulting on everything, including the company where he was once working for her, and now multiple other companies, including Kevin Feige's company. And the analogy I think we could think of it is actually Darth Vader, because Darth Vader is not in the military of the empire. He's sort of doing his own thing, but he directly serves the emperor, and so
he's an advisor. Yeah. No,
he's
you're
out
right.
of the hierarchy of the structure, but he's above everybody in the process.
You're right. No, that is actually a very good analogy. And, we've talked about the whole Kennedy dynamic, the Favreau and Kennedy dynamic here before. Doomcock has talked about this for a number of years. A lot of channels out there have. And I realize some people out there that are, very frustrated with Star Wars. They don't think it's ever going to change. They think it's doomed forever. And I totally understand that. I respect those opinions 100%, because as I've said, as you've said, Disney broke it. right?
Look at, and people are right to be upset. There's a lot of pain. You know, these things weren't just movies. They were important to us on a mythical level for a whole generation, a couple of generations. So I get the deep hurt that it was that caused people, and why people be like, I don't think it can ever be fixed, and you know, I don't want to open this wound by even thinking about it.
Right. And I think part of this is, like we've discussed in some previous videos, you know, we talked about a lot last year that, you know, would Kennedy, you know, be renewed for her contract, yes or no? And of course, the business and financial data strongly suggested no. There's no way that you would renew somebody that has broken a fandom, broken a franchise, broken the most valuable intellectual property, financially speaking, in cinematic history. You wouldn't renew somebody like that. But of course, on the other side of things, it's Hollywood. Things don't always make sense. And as far as we can tell at this point, she's still in charge, quote unquote, of Lucasfilm. But then again, and this goes into the next point, is that, like you and I have talked about before, it's always the timing of these stories, is it not, that is the most interesting and most fascinating aspect? Because last year, this whole thing about Kennedy back and forth, and then we finally settled on the fact that, well, okay, she's still there, but with what power? You know, going back to one of the previous videos that you and I had done. And I think you and I both posited in that video that, well, look, the only reasonable assumption that I could have at this point is because Robert Iger is still, of course, or at least at the time that this would have happened, Robert Iger was still the chairman, the executive chairman and chairman of the board, his official titles, of the Walt Disney Company. So if Bob Chapek probably thought it's best that we move on from Miss Kennedy and find somebody else, and I think the same opinion held by Mr. Alan Bergman, who is, as we've said before, looking at something like Lucasfilm with that valuable IP that hasn't moved a single Star Wars project into theatrical pre-production in 5 or 6 years. We've got to get somebody else, right? We had the news about, well, now they're going to hand the keys to Favreau, even though Kennedy's still there. But Robert Iger was still there at the time that Kennedy's contract was allegedly renewed. He's not there anymore. Now it's Chapek and it's Susan Arnold. And since January 1st, we have had just a plethora of bomb drops coming out, either through official channels like Deadline, THR, and Variety, or through the leaks and the rumor sites like WDW Pro, thatparkplace.com, places like this that are leaking these kind of stories about a lot of internal machinations and movements at Disney. I don't think the timing of this is by an accident. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I mean, the timing is, of course, not by an accident. I mean, we see the events that are happening. We're still in January. It feels like you know, at least in this saga, it's been a year already. So much has happened. So much has been reported. So much has been rumored, and all of it feels true. You know, what we know for a fact is that January started off with a bang with Bob Chapek putting out a memo that was quickly put out onto the trades. And you know, our friend Tom at Midnight's Edge has said he's hearing that other studios are now taking the comments that Bob Chapek had to heart for themselves, where he said we cannot fight the audience. That doesn't surprise me because it clearly was not even leaked. It was sent to the trades. Put this out there, right? And and this was a message. And at a time after a couple of years of financial crisis, all the studios just looking for someone to be able to say it out loud. And Bob Chapek happened to be the person positioned to do so because he just got a new boss on there who supports him, as I believe. And then we've heard these rumors that I largely give credence to, that Susan Arnold laid down the law because when you're the new chairman of a board, of a company that's been through a very bad time, you certainly lay down how things are going to be moving forward. What the tone of that was, I wasn't in the room. You weren't in the room. You know, we don't know. But definitely, I do believe she laid down that we're going to move forward and not be adversarial to the customer because Bob Chapek has said that publicly, right? And so I'm sure that was laid down. And then shortly after that, we have the third domino to fall, which is word coming out that Jon Favreau has this now kind of executive advisor position, which essentially makes him the Darth Vader outside of the hierarchy that can order any of these people around and tell them what to do, right? And that's the irony of it, is that, you know, Mr. Favreau has had to, in my opinion, suffer a great deal of indignity the last couple of years because he's had to answer under the hierarchy of Disney and things where, you know, he and Ms. Kennedy disagreed, such as the future of Gina Carano. He wasn't in any kind of position to I mean, who could he go to? Bob Iger?
He was a contractor. And that's an important point, Cameron, I think, for everybody to remember that, you know, Favreau was in charge of Mandalorian or the Mandoverse or whatever we want to call it over there at Lucasfilm. But at the end of the day, Jon Favreau has never, to anybody's knowledge, been an actual employee of Lucasfilm or of Disney.
Well,
Jon Favreau has always been a contractor to come in and be a showrunner. That's a very different position. So again, exactly what Cameron said, he might have been a showrunner for that show, but he wasn't in an authoritative position to be able to either re-sign or not re-sign any cast member, including Miss Carano. At that point, that would have come, any of those contracts, whether it's Gina Carano or Pedro Pascal, Tamora Morrison, Ming-Na Wen, that whole crew, they have contracts directly with Lucasfilm, that. Not under
clarify
purview. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. I just want to clarify because this is the structure which many people don't understand. Because I live and work under this professional structure, as a screenwriter and someone who works a lot in television. I am a contractor. I have my own corporation, which is a standard thing. I have my own what is called a loan-out corporation. So when Warner Brothers or some other entity or Disney wants to make a deal and wants me to come on board, they make a deal with my entity, my corporation, which exists for tax purposes, right? And then there's a separate contract. So the money is going to go to that corporate structure. Then there's a separate contract that I have to sign, which essentially says I agree as an employee of my legal entity to be loaned out. It's a loaned out corporation. I'm loaned out. So I'm not actually working for Disney. I'm working for Pasha Media Inc., my corporation, right? And I'm being loaned out by my corporation. And it's a kind of a deal with, we're going to give you money. Can we borrow your employee? And most people, certainly on the screenwriting and the directing side, which Mr. Favreau is in, he's also an actor, and actors have these as well. But definitely screenwriters and directors have these. And so I'm sure that his deal to run The Mandalorian and any other work he's doing there, Book of Boba Fett, is being done in a loan-out situation. So he's an employee not of Disney, but an employee of Jon Favreau Inc.
Right. I was going to say Favreau Creative LLC. And just for everybody watching, and again, on the business side, 20 years that I've spent in the financial planning industry. I don't do tax, I don't do law, but we have to deal with a lot of tax and law every day in my line of work. And that being said, anybody out there, especially big time actor, director, producer, they're all going to have these legal entities set up like Cameron is talking about because of tax reasons and legal reasons. That's why they're there. The IRS and the way that the laws work allow certain advantages to have things set up that way. And that's why this is done. So this is nothing out of the ordinary or special. You could find your mom and pop business down the street. It's going to work the same exact way.
Yeah. It's all for tax reasons, and because if he didn't do that way, that he'd probably be paying 50 to 55% in taxes with a good accountant under that kind of structure. His personal payouts probably be closer to maybe 20-25%, right? Which is substantial savings, right? Who knows how it works out? But in the end, there is a substantial tax savings. That's why people do it that way, right? But what that means is that exactly what Valiant has said is that he was in no position to intervene in a situation like the Carano situation, because he's not even an employee of Disney. He's a loaned out employee of his personal entity. And so he has no authority. Those contracts are being made with the person that's dealing with his entity, which is Lucasfilm. But in this new position, he may very well have some kind of personal employment contract. He may still be in a loan out type of situation, but for this kind of relationship where he's being asked to come on as a consultant or an advisor, however the legal structure of it is, the end result is that he is now being given authority that he did not have under his previous situation. And the magical thing is he now has, it's flipped the gears. He now has authority over Kathleen Kennedy, over Kevin Feige, over Pixar. It's amazing the amount of authority that he now has. In the end, Alan Bergman has more authority than him, but it's like the Emperor has more authority than Vader. But Vader, certainly, when he walks in the room, everyone realizes who's the boss at that moment.
Yeah, I was going to actually make an analogy. I'm glad you brought that up, because just again, for everybody watching out there at home, to kind of make this a little bit more sense, two things I'm going to offer to you. So like if anybody out there has a pipe breaks in their house or a drain backs up, you call ABC Plumbing. Now the guy that comes out is the plumber himself. He's the one that owns the company, and let's say his name is Bob, okay? Bob is the one fixing your drain, but you're writing the check, that $200 check to Bob for Bob to come out to ABC Plumbing. That's Bob's company, right? It's the same thing here with somebody like Mr. Jon Favreau. Now, Favreau's new position at Disney, to be a little bit more descriptive, I guess, in terms of, hopefully, if everybody out there is old enough and remembers this movie, one of my favorite movies is Office Space. Cameron, do you know this one?
Of course. Classic.
Okay. Yeah. Everybody. Okay. Do you remember the Bobs? The two Bobs in that movie?
Yeah.
Jon Favreau is the two Bobs in this case. He is the consultant that is being contracted. He's an outside business being contracted, in this case, by Disney, to come in and evaluate all the employees at Disney, right? In this case, all the studio heads. And basically sit down at the table as these guys present their ideas. And of course, maybe not in this same comedic or crass or harsh,
although Disney is a little bit of a black comedy right now.
Yeah, a little bit of black comedy. No, but I mean, just think about the two Bobs sitting at that table. Think about Jon Favreau sitting there and looking at somebody like Kathleen Kennedy at this point, sitting next to Alan Bergman and Bob Chapek as they present their ideas, or as Kevin Feige, or the head of Pixar, the head of Disney Animation Studios. And Favreau is basically looking back at them at this point going, I'm not an employee, but, I have a question for you. What would you say you do here? I mean, it's that moment of the meeting with the Bobs from Office Space. This is kind of the position that Favreau has taken, at least according to the rumors that we have at this point, which, again, I wouldn't be sitting here talking about if I didn't think there was some decent or better than 50-50 level of plausibility.
And there's precedence for it, as you mentioned.
There is with John Lasseter. And that's why I look back and I say Disney has done this before. Disney did this for over a decade under Robert Iger. I absolutely can see this being a reality check, particularly when we look at some of the successes, or in some cases, the lack of success with some of their more recent theatrical releases. We've talked about, like Encanto and things like this. And again, not a knock against the movie itself. Encanto, in fact, right now has one of the most popular soundtracks of all time. I understand from what I've read, it has beaten Frozen's Let It Go with one of their songs, which is amazing. Good for Encanto. Good for Mr. Lin-Manuel Miranda, a tremendously talented songwriter. The movie itself, though, didn't do that well. So they're getting portions of their projects out there to be really popular, but what they want is another Frozen, where the movie is a $2 billion gangbuster, and the soundtrack is. They didn't get that with Encanto. They haven't gotten that with the new Marvel movies that we've had in Phase 4 with Shang-Chi and with the Eternals. The merchandise sales have been poop. Let's be honest. And they're hoping right now at this point that Doctor Strange in the Multiverse is going to be, a huge box office, blockbuster. That is yet to be seen. We're 4 months away from that movie coming out, but starting to set the stage for the next several years by having a creative genius like Jon Favreau, regardless of what we think is going on with Book of Boba Fett right now. That's another conversation. But historically, a bona fide creative genius like Favreau to come in and sit there right next to Alan Bergman and Bob Chapek as these studio heads pitch their ideas in these monthly meetings all together, and for Favreau to say, yeah, but did you think about this? Yeah, but that might not work. Well, that's a good idea.
The rumor that we're hearing that our friend Doomcock reported on also ties into other rumors that we're hearing. I think WDW Pro had separately about a few days before, because it feels like these are happening so much. So many things are happening. A few days before, if I recall correctly, he had put out an article saying that the perhaps uneven storytelling of the Book of Boba Fett, he credited to on his thatparkplace.com, he credited to Jon Favreau being distracted because, in his claim, Bergman was taking him and flying him around and putting him in this at that time, undefined new level of authority over other things. And suddenly we have this report from Doomcock independently of that, suggesting that's what happened here, that this was set in place. It's probably been building for some time, that he was being given other responsibilities, and now he has a more formal title in that. And so it's all we're seeing from multiple sources, something is happening that's making him not be focused necessarily just on Lucasfilm, for better or worse.
Yeah, I think that could be part of it. And of course, only time will tell. And as we know from Disney, information like that does not leak lightly. That might come out in a tell-all book 20 years from now in Favreau's retirement when he's getting a Lifetime Achievement Award. God only knows. But hopefully we'll find out more as time goes on, because I think the story has a lot of fascination to it. It's something I know I'm going to be following as we get more news, and hopefully we will. I believe that WDW Pro and that parkplace.com is going to be releasing a more perhaps in-depth article on this in the next couple of days. So people are watching this video as it comes out Monday morning. By the time you see this, there may be a new pro article that comes out on his website on that parkplace.com. So we'll stay tuned for it. But what do you think, Kamran, is kind of a final thought to this discussion? What do you think this could look like going forward? Let's assume that this is starting. We know, at least from some other leaks that have come out, that that this is where this is going. Chapek has leaked this memo out, this official memo out that we discussed previously. These monthly meetings, all the studio heads in a room. It makes sense, again, that Bergman and Chapek are going to want somebody sitting there that is not attached to these studios. That's not going to be another quote unquote yes man. That's going to be somebody who is paid to be bluntly honest about future projects. If this is Jon Favreau, what do you think this is going to look like over the next 12 to 24 months? What do you think these studio heads are going to be going through?
Well, I think we've seen a prelude to it, or in Bob Chapek's memo, where he very intriguingly established that he's going to have these monthly meetings with the studio heads. And people said, well, this guy's a CEO. That's not really normal to have monthly meetings. Maybe he's not going to be in those. I was like, well, if he's not going to be those, he'll have a proxy there. And so suddenly, if Favreau has his role, that would be the natural proxy to be in those meetings while Chapek is off running a multi-billion-dollar company. He doesn't need to be hearing story pitches for Mandalorian season 4 or wherever, right? I mean, or a Book of Obi-Wan or whatever. He has things to do. So he would then have a proxy there. He would have an apprentice, an acolyte, and Jon Favreau would likely play that role of who's going to be present in these monthly meetings. So this is really, it's an amazing switch of power, where Mr. Favreau, I think a year ago, was sitting in meetings where he's pitching to Kathleen Kennedy, this is what we'd like to do. What do you think, Madam Boss, right? To now, Miss Kennedy, so Kathy, what do you got on the table? I don't know about that.
That's true.
Yeah, and it's a flip, and we've already seen in the memo that there are going to be these new monthly meetings with the studio heads. So I think he's going to be there, and essentially he's going to be chairing those meetings. Sort of like the hand of the king, right? Sitting there on the. Well,
that's just it. He's Tyrion Lannister at this point. I mean, that's what we're talking about here, and not season 8 Game of Thrones. Don't anybody complain about that, but. I know. I do think it's interesting. I don't even know. I mean, you think that Kathy would be there, but then again, Kathy has had such a laid-back absentee landlord role at Lucasfilm for the last several years. We found out, 8 months after it happened, that Dave Filoni had been made executive creative director over all of Lucasfilm. I kind of almost tend to think that Filoni's the one that's sitting in there. Even if Kathy is there, Filoni's probably the one doing most of the talking. God only knows, but it's an interesting time. So let us know what you guys think out there. Does any of this make sense? Do you think this is amazing? Do you think it's all bunk? We want to hear from you. Make sure you leave a comment before you head out today. And of course, make sure you go ahead and subscribe to Kamran Pasha's Patreon page. Link in the description below, as always. Kamran, any final thoughts before we check out?
The last thought I'm going to say is, don't give up hope here. I think people are still concerned with some of the, like I said, uneven storytelling quality of the Book of Boba Fett. But everything we see in Hollywood is a process of last year. So even as the conversations we're seeing on WDW Pro, Book of Boba Fett is a process of the situation, the political situation in Lucasfilm 1 year ago when Miss Carano was being fired. Apparently, Favreau was being set up for this new position and was running around doing a lot of things. So if Mr. Favreau is in this position, which I do believe is likely, then look out for better storytelling 1 year from now. You have to be patient. He's putting things in motion now to get this ship off the iceberg. It will take time. So don't, if other stuff comes out at Disney or on Marvel or other things, Disney Plus in the next few weeks or months that you don't really like, again, that's stuff from last year. Give Jon Favreau, if you like what Favreau has done, give him a chance to prove what he can do. It'll be about a year before we see the end result of that.
Yeah, I would say at least a year. A 1 year might even be too short a period of time, because I know Hollywood, and you know this better than I do. Hollywood is a very slow animal with very, very long gestational periods for projects. So we're gonna hold tight. We're gonna see some more goofery coming out. We already know what's been announced, and I think, to Cameron's point, what's important to look at is, number one, if you see something you don't like, go back and investigate for yourself. Don't take anybody else's word for it. Do your own research. Look to see when these projects were greenlit. Who greenlit them? At what point? I mean, if they were projects that were still greenlit under Robert Iger and going back, because there's a lot of them out there still coming out that were. You remember a lot of these projects, and Cameron can attest to this, from the time that you conceive of a project to the time it might actually make it to the screen, whether it's television or film, you're talking a couple of 2 or 3 years, I think, at least. A lot of times it's a very slow period. So bear that in mind, everybody out there. But thank you for joining us today. Please make sure you hit that subscribe button, that like button, that notification bell. Do share this out on the social medias and leave a comment before you check out, as we mentioned before. And until next time, folks, thanks for being here and take care.